The most exciting thing about diving is all the amazing marine life you get to experience. The amazing beauty of the underwater world is impossible to describe. Learning the proper way to take underwater images can be both rewarding and exciting. Taking pictures is a great way to share your adventures with all of your friends. Compared to other skill sets, digital photography is comparatively simple. The ability to immediately manipulate the results of your work on the camera's monitor makes learning easier because it is no longer necessary to spend days or even weeks waiting for results. When light penetrates into clear water at a perpendicular angle, it loses 50% of its surface brightness after 1 meter or 3 feet. This loss is caused by reflection, refraction, diffusion, and the loss of color due to selective extinction. For the reasons given previously, an image which captures the full spectrum of colors without using a strobe is only achievable if the light has traveled less than 5 meters or 15 feet. However, it is not only the distance between the camera and the subject that matters, but the distance to the surface as well. This translates into the most important principle of underwater photography: the closer, the better. When you consider the many advantages that digital underwater photography has to offer, it is surprising that this fascinating hobby is not pursued by every diver. It may be that many divers think digital underwater photography is too complicated and expensive. As you will learn from this course, this is not the case. In fact, we're certain that you will find multiple reasons that digital underwater photography is for you. When looking to purchase digital cameras, the choices today are overwhelming. It is important to know which features you should look for and what you can do without when it comes to underwater photography equipment. There is only one overall criterion that has to apply whenever a camera is selected. It must have a suitable underwater housing. Once that has been decided, the next question will be the camera's purpose. How will the camera and the images it will produce be used? The first things to consider are the number of megapixels and the zoom range, the size of the image sensor, the quality of the optical components, and the software inside the camera should also be considered. In order to do underwater photography, you will also need to add a suitable waterproof housing and an underwater flash, strobe. When taking photographs underwater, it is important to have as little water between your lens and the subject in order to capture as few unwanted particles as possible. In this situation, a wide-angle lens is preferable because it will allow you to get more onto the image from a shorter distance. In order to optimize the use of a wide-angle lens with a digital single-lens reflex camera, it is preferable to use a dome glass or dome port as opposed to flat port. Without the curved glass, there is a reduction of the angle of view. Metal housings are stronger than those made from synthetic materials in terms of pressure resistance, with carbon materials being the exception. Generally, they can be used to a depth of 196 to 328 feet or 60 to 100 meters. However, this does not mean that you can expect to operate at deeper depths without preparation, as a dive to deeper depths requires special planning and care. When planning your dive, it's a good idea to allow some time for the temperature between the housing and water to equalize. Avoid exposing the housing directly to sunlight before you dive. What digital camera you decide to use is not of primary importance. What matters is that your photographic equipment is affordable and that you are satisfied with its technical features. When you take your camera underwater, you expose it to stress factors which do not exist on land and for which the camera has not been designed. Digital cameras are equipped with very complex electronics. A leak will almost always result in major damage to your camera. As you prepare your camera system for underwater use, the majority of your time will be spent on the removal, cleaning, checking, and reseating of O-rings. You will need a variety of tools in order to maintain your camera. Therefore, it is essential to bring sufficient supplies with you. Carefully assemble and test the camera system before taking it underwater. It's best to do this during a quiet period. Avoid jumping into the water with your camera unless you absolutely have to. Instead, ask someone to hand you the camera after you have entered the water, or place it in a location that can easily be reached once you are in the water, such as a diving platform. Secure your camera with a safety line or a snap hook attached to your wrist or to your buoyancy compensator. This will allow you to keep your hands free when needed. As soon as you are submerged, there are a few things that you should pay attention to. First, check that your camera housing is truly sealed, just to be on the safe side. As you descend, continue to inspect the underwater housing by turning and looking into it from all sides. If the seals are working properly and there is no leakage, switch the camera on and take a test photo to check that it is functioning correctly. Once that has been established, there are a number of settings to choose from. These will be discussed in the next section. Rinse your camera system as quickly as possible in fresh water after each dive. Open the housing with the cover facing down so that no water can enter. Take care to make sure that no water will drip onto the camera during and after opening the housing. Proper care, preparation, and handling of your digital underwater camera system is essential in order to be able to enjoy problem-free functioning. If you are willing to follow the relatively few steps and procedures that we have just outlined, then your underwater photography is likely to become a source of pleasure for many years. Once you are submerged and have made certain that your camera is functional and the system is sealed, there are a number of settings to choose from. The settings you use will depend on the options that your system offers, as well as on your personal preferences. Proper lighting is critical to good photography. It is important that the image is neither too light nor too dark. This requires determining the amount of light that needs to reach the image sensor and the period of exposure time. The degree of sensitivity with which the sensor will react will also have to be established. If any one of these three settings is changed, the others need to be adjusted in tandem. For instance, if you change the exposure time, you also have to adjust the aperture. Note, if you are using an automatic camera, you do not have to worry about adjusting these settings. If you are not interested in making decisions about shutter speed, aperture, and ISO settings underwater, you should use the camera's Auto ISO function. This will automatically adjust the ISO sensitivity to your ambient light. The light conditions underwater are quite different. As depths increase, the color absorption increases, and the light loses its intensity. There are two ways to regain color in your images. First, you can take photos without a flash, provided you do a manual white balance before every shot. This is cumbersome and only makes sense in shallow depths. A second option is to use an underwater flash or strobe. Whether you photograph with or without a flash or strobe depends primarily on the ambient light, the mood, the size of the subject, and the depth at which you are operating. Though it is possible to create interesting images without a flash or strobe to a depth of 4 to 5 meters or 12 to 15 feet, underwater photographers use artificial light more than 90% of the time. There are multiple reasons for this. A flash or strobe adds color to an image, brightens low-light environments, and is a tool for artistic expression. Whether you are diving in fresh or saltwater, or in cold or warm aquatic environments, the variety of subjects found underwater is enormous. Both beginners and experienced photographers will find that there is a wealth of interesting subject matter waiting for them. It's recommended that new underwater photographers start by photographing still subjects, such as corals, seashells, or aquatic plants. A still subject will not swim away, so you have plenty of time to work with your camera. A creature that is slow by nature will remain slow, even when you approach it closely. Sea cucumbers and nocturnal snails are not particularly bothered when a photographer readies his camera and positions his lens within millimeters of them. Photographing fish as opposed to firmly attached subject matter is a much more challenging task. Therefore, it is highly recommended to hone your skills by photographing slow-moving or bottom-resting fish. Before you begin to take your shots, make sure that you will not damage anything and that your fins are resting in a spot where they cannot cause damage. Remember that churned up sand can harm tiny coral polyps and other forms of life, just as if you had physically touched them. If you want to get the best pictures, sign up for the SSI Perfect Buoyancy Specialty Program. Almost every person that explores underwater photography realizes that this hobby is not only deeply engaging and satisfying, but also the source of new impetus for the sport of diving itself. It will cause many divers to re-evaluate why they dive in the first place. There is no longer a reason to dive more deeply than necessary, because the most beautiful subjects are almost always to be found in the shallower depths of the ocean. This makes diving a safer sport. Also, our sensitivity to the environment increases. It is, after all, more satisfying to take images of an environment that has remained natural and undamaged. Digital technology gives you the capability to optimize your images through a secondary process that is not available with analog photography. Such a process allows you to fine-tune your images to suit your taste. Once you have taken your first underwater pictures and have viewed them on your camera display, you will need to transfer them onto a computer for further editing. Editing digital images has never been easier. Thanks to the latest computer technology, every hobby photographer can correct mistakes and adjust lighting and contrast. Yes, it takes time, but with a little practice, the results can be spectacular. Even so, it's important to remember that starting out with good beginning material is the best way to assure success when editing images. Therefore, you should always put your main emphasis on developing good initial photography technique. As we all know, practice makes perfect.